Welcome to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith. On this episode, we'll get the latest update from Washington, D.C. as Hunter Carpenter with the Ag Retailers Association and Sean McCarty, Government Affairs Manager with Helena, brings us up to speed with the latest news about the Farm Bill. Plus, Veronica Nigh, Senior Economist with the Fertilizer Institute, shares insight about the connection between food security and global security and how fertilizer is a vital component for both. As a bonus, Jessie sits down with Helena product manager Greg Norris and sales representative Kevin Rodak to visit about vegetable production in New England and how Trico Pro has helped producers in their market protect their vegetables and tree crops from deer. Finally, Jody Lawrence will join us from Nashville for a commodity market update. Stay tuned for this episode of FieldLink. Hey folks, join Chip Flory from AgriTalk and Sean Haney from Real Ag Radio as Jody Lawrence joins them to talk about commodities and some of the marketing trends that could impact your profitability in 2024. Join us at the Innovation Expo as all three join together on a platform to talk about those critical topics that can impact your farm, your field, and your acre this year. Join us July 18th in Memphis. Welcome to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith, and joining us today in the FieldLink studio is Hunter Carpenter. Hunter is with the Ag Retailers Association. Hunter, welcome to FieldLink.
Thanks so much, Bill. Appreciate you having me on.
Also joining us is Sean McCarty. He is the Government Affairs Specialist, Director, if you will, for Helena. Sean, welcome.
Pleasure as always.
All right. Good to have you guys here. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what ARA does. Hunter, you're in from D.C., the big city. You got a lot going on with ARA. But for a lot of our listeners, they may not know what ARA is. Tell us a little bit about ARA.
Well, thanks so much, Bill. The Agricultural Retailers Association really is the trade association that represents farm suppliers and dealers throughout the country in Washington, D.C., meeting with lawmakers and regulators about the issues that affect your freedom and license to operate as a business, first and foremost. But we also want to do what we can to provide member services to folks like Helena who have seen it necessary to join ARA. So there are many different things that we provide for our members, but advocacy on the Hill being the major thing.
Yeah, definitely a great partner of ours here at Helena, as well as many other retailers across the great nation here. Hunter, though, where's home for you? Where did you grow up?
Well, I'm originally from Mississippi. I previously worked for Governor Haley Barbour when he was governor there and had interned in D.C. when I was still in college. And so I got a little bit of the Potomac fever and decided to head back to D.C. Following my stint in the governor's office. So I've been in D.C. a little bit over 12 years now.
Okay, and been with ARA for?
It's just over 10.
10 years, all right. Well, welcome. Again, welcome to Memphis here in the FieldLink studio. Hunter, now that we know a little bit about ARA and you, tell us a little bit about some of the high-level things that you're working on around the Farm Bill right now.
Yeah, so everyone knows we're already late on a Farm Bill, as that was supposed to get done last year. They did pass a one-year extension. We've moved into 2024. We've already seen a market come out of the House Agriculture Committee, a bipartisan plan that we were supportive of, still waiting on action on the Senate side. But your guess is as good as mine as to when that will get done. But we are running out of legislative days on the calendar very quickly.
Wow. So, okay, let's step back a little bit for most of our listeners. We know the Farm Bill is still this tug-of-war stage, we'll call it, and we're still waiting. But there's been a lot of activity going on. And when we think about the Farm Bill, what really makes up the Farm Bill for the average listener out here?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things to know is that the Farm Bill is made up of 12 titles. They each cover different aspects of food and nutrition and everything within the supply chain of the agriculture community. So just to tell you a little bit about the parts of the Farm Bill that ARA does not work in, we pretty much stay out of Title I and Title IV, which is the commodity title, and the nutrition title. The nutrition title is the supplemental nutrition assistance benefits, so SNAP payments, and a lot of that is to help feed underserved and underprivileged folks in America. very necessary part of the Farm Bill, but it's one that we don't wade into policy-wise. We also stay out of the commodity title, seeing as we have retailers in every state that grow every kind of crop. So those are the two things that we don't wade too heavily in, but it's also about 81 to 90% of the funding in the bill. I know the nutrition title alone is 81%. So then you factor in the ARC and PLC and reference price payments and stuff, and you start increasing what'll make up a $1.5 trillion bill this year over the next 10 years.
And when you really break that down, when we call it the Farm Bill, not all that money's going to the farm, essentially.
That's correct. A lot of it is to help provide for needy families. So certainly is part of the Farm Bill that is necessary and helps get a bipartisan plan across the finish line typically. But we have seen some issues in the nutrition title this year where you don't see as much agreement from the Republicans and Democrats on some of those issues.
Right. And I think to your point, it's important to have that in there because it pulls in some of those, I guess, legislators that may not be from a rural America, but definitely have a need for, nutrition in their communities. Yep. So Hunter, talk to us a little bit about some of the things that you're truly involved in. One of those things is conservation. Let's talk about conservation as a part of the Farm Bill.
That's right. We do play heavily in the conservation title. We have been, this is now my second time working on a Farm Bill, was heavily involved in the 2018 Farm Bill on the conservation side, trying to figure out a way to streamline the certification process at NRCS to get ag retailers and their employees certified as technical service providers. There are a lot of hoops to jump through, as you already know, to become certified. And to us, it didn't make a whole lot of sense, as many times the certified crop advisors that are employed by the ag retailer are already doing this work anyway. And in many instances not getting paid for it. So what we want to see happen is a quicker certification process for those TSPs. We had bill language introduced this year, bipartisan, bicameral, meaning both the House and the Senate had legislation introduced to do just that. And we are very thankful that we've had Republicans and Democrats alike support this. And it did make it into the House markup as well as being in Senator Stabenow's summary on the Senate side. So we're hopeful this is going to get done. It's just a matter of when.
And who's on first kind of deal. So another area that is often, I don't want to say overlooked, but a very critical part is crop insurance. And crop insurance continues to be a very big part of the Farm Bill this year, correct?
That's absolutely correct. And we want to make sure we can do everything to improve that safety net for our grower customers. These things have to get updated from time to time. They need to make adjustments for inflation, which we are seeing record inflation numbers right now. I know everyone knows that already. So the crop insurance updates they're the first thing listed on our issue paper that we take to the Hill.
Hunter, tell me a little bit about this. I know enough to be dangerous, but over the last several years, as it relates to crop insurance, we've seen a big shift on the forage side of things that's really opened up crop insurance to a lot of different producers. Is that continuing to grow?
Yes, I think it is. And, when we had really bad flooding in 2019, there were a lot of folks that didn't plant and didn't get anything in the ground, but they ended up harvesting and using some of that for forage and were allowed to do so under the rules that were passed back then. So we're hopefully get some sort of long-term solution. We certainly don't want any weather events like we saw then to happen again, but we do like it when Congress responds quickly as they did then.
Yeah, you certainly don't want to wish for weather events, but it's important to plan for them, as you mentioned.
That's right.
I'm going to pull Sean McCarty in here now. Sean, you and Hunter get to work together a lot on the Hill, talking about different policies and working together. What are some things that I guess you see, Sean, that are impacting, ag retail as well as some of our grower customers too, as we look into the Farm Bill in 2024?
Well, I think the overarching theme is the certainty that it provides. The Farm Bill is that safety net, as Hunter said. And as we approach planting season every year, farmers are taking a gamble. Right. Every year is different. No 2 years are the same. And really, the push from Helena and from other members of the Agri-Retailers Association and the industry has been we just want to see something passed.
Right.
We want to have that certainty so that our customers, our colleagues, our friends, our family members feel comfortable going into the field that year. And when we've had other challenges, Hunter mentioned inflation, we know that there's been labor shortages and challenges, the cost of doing business, the cost of land, the business regulations that have increased, and that varies state by state. All these things have made the effort to turn a profit harder and harder. And so when we look at the Farm Bill and what is involved in each of those titles, we know that sometimes that's the difference between operating your farm the next year and not.
Right.
And if there's one thing that Helena and others want to see is that those family farms continue to operate. And whatever we can do to provide certainty within those titles, we're here for. Yeah, we're going to have some differences here and there, but for the most part, it's let's get something passed. We've all got our wish lists. We know that some things are going to make it, some things aren't going to. But the longer this drags on, the more we get punished. Hunter mentioned 1.5 trillion, but if this continues to drag on, there's some mechanisms in place that cost actually gets driven further up.
Wow. And so here we are, we're recording here in June. And guys, where are we at? Where are we at in the whole process? What can growers expect? Are we going to have a farm bill here in the next few months?
That's a great question. And if I knew the answer, I would probably go to the casino or buy a lottery
Let's go
ticket.
to Vegas, baby.
It's really hard to tell. We do have the 2018 Farm Bill that got extended last year will run out at the end of September, so they need to get something done. But a lot of the funding within the bill is funded permanently, so it's not like the cash stops going out for EBT payments, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that thankfully will continue regardless of when the bill expires. However, we have made a pitch to folks on Capitol Hill that we don't need to wait to the last minute on this. The House marked up a bill. It would be our suggestion that the Senate mark up a bill, get in committee, find out where you have differences, and just have votes up and down on what amendments you need to have to the language. I don't feel super optimistic about anything getting done before that September 30 deadline. There's a possibility that they pass another extension of the 18 bill, which would take us into 2025. With it being an election year, there's a lot of uncertainty about who will write the next farm bill and the next proposal. But it's my understanding that there have been talks between Republicans and Democrats on the Senate side about, pushing forward this year, even if it's after the election, before the new administration comes in next January.
So between that November and December timeframe, we might see some action happening.
It's a possibility. But my old boss used to say, if somebody tells you they know what's going to happen in politics, they're probably lying to you. So
that never happens, does it, guys?
Yeah, no, and I think that from the politics of it make it challenging. There's some items on the Senate side that are included in the framework that was laid out from leadership involving some conservation programs and the permanency of those instead of reissuing those, making them permanent. And there's a fear, whether we want to say it's very rational or irrational. There's a fear that if we make those programs permanent, in addition to the supplemental nutrition funding that is permanent and guaranteed, what reason would, in this case, Democrats have, for the most part, to come to the table to offer bipartisan legislation in future farm bills? If those programs are already permanent, then could you break them apart? And part of the history of the Farm Bill and what has led us to be able to pass these, maybe not necessarily on time, but generally speaking in a bipartisan manner and relatively efficiently, is that we need each other. Right. The farm portion and the nutrition part go together. And so there's a fear there of the legislation or the framework that has been laid out from the Senate leadership. The minority staff on the ag side within the Senate has said, hey, look, we've got a framework that we might propose. We've talked in past podcasts that there's a belief amongst Republicans that come November they could regain the majority in the Senate side. If that's the case, then they issue their version of the Farm Bill. The complexity within the Senate side is you still need 60 votes.
Right.
So whereas on the House side, right now we're at the slimmest of majorities on the Republican side, and Democrats believe they can flip that. Hey, we could offer you a better farm bill come November from the Democrats' perspective. All it takes is that majority in the House. In the Senate, you need 60 votes. So regardless of who is leading from a majority standpoint on the Senate side, you're still going to need votes from the other side. And that's why finding a bipartisan path is so key. So our goal right now is, as Hunter said, is, look, yes, we have some preferences on what we'd like to see from a specific standpoint. But really, when we look at things like biostimulants, when we look at things like tech service providers, or tech support folks, those are bipartisan agreements. They are not some of the more polarizing issues that we know we're going to have a hard time, especially if one side flips. But let's find the ones that there's been standalone bills out there that we've got support of, and let's find a path forward for those, regardless of who's in power.
Stack hands quickly on some of those, I guess, no nonsense, if you will, common sense is probably the right word, type of issues. Guys, what are some of the other, I guess, polarizing, challenging areas that you see on the left and on the right, tugging and pulling that, our listeners might want to be aware of?
Look, I think the nutrition title and the amount of funding that goes into this bill are going to always be the most polarizing.
Sure.
And Sean made a good point. On the Republican side, even though they have a slim majority, they might have to worry about some of their own Republicans voting against a farm bill because of the cost. So
sure.
You got to get folks on both sides of the aisle in agreement and pass a bipartisan package. And the best way to do that is to come to the table, work out the differences.
Right.
So what we have always said is, I think folks agree on a lot of this stuff that's in the Farm Bill more than they let on. And what we'd like to see is folks on the Senate side sit down and talk through those issues that they don't agree on. We've got a number of other policy priority issues that made it into the House markup. Actually, our issue paper included a definition for what biostimulants are, some language around pesticide preemption and state lead agencies, MPDS permit relief, and then a lot of research for our ag research dollars funding and broadband expansion. So the Farm Bill is all-encompassing. It probably touches every part of the country more so than any other piece of legislation.
Hunter, I think you bring up a really, really important point. The headlines of the media, if you're a casual listener, you hear about SNAP, you hear about, crop insurance a lot of times, but it goes far deeper than that. You touched on an important one, research. Research is really critical, and it's a big part, or should be a big part, of the Farm Bill. What's at jeopardy from your perspective as it relates to research?
Well, the biggest thing at jeopardy right now is that foreign countries, in many instances, some of our adversaries are spending more on ag research than we are in this country, which is a shame. So we've supported increasing that ag research budget, helping those land-grant institutions that are doing a lot of this work at the field level and bring in sort of the next generation of folks working in the ag business. I will say that for the last 20 years or so, foreign countries have been spending more on ag research. And food security is national security. That's not just a talking point. You look at the countries that have problems and are being invaded and going to war, it's the ones that can't provide food for all of their citizens.
Right, yeah. And if you're questioning that, just turn the news on, right?
That's right.
Most of the, war-stricken areas it's usually around food at some point, or nutrition, if you will. Great point on research. Interesting to find out that it feels like we've done a great job with our institutions over the years, and we have, but to your point, Hunter, the last 20 years, we've backed off a little bit on some of the basic research and leaned probably on industry, but some of our adversaries have picked up that gap a little bit. I'm sure one of them being China, correct?
That's right.
Yeah. What are some other spaces, Sean McCarty, that are top of mind for, growers from your perspective?
Well, I think Hunter touched on something that is, we talk about pesticide preemption, and that's one of those issues that is probably one of the more polarizing ones. But we have tried to really impress upon folks that as the products that are being sold and used in the marketplace today spend, what amounts to probably $500 million in 15 years going through their regulatory approval process through EPA. We've seen countless times where localities and counties, cities, and states have decided to alter the registrations, change the labels, change the language and the warnings on the labels, and that creates more uncertainty, right? We talked about grower uncertainty. Well, that's uncertainty for companies, and that's uncertainty for innovation. We talked about the research, but as a company, when you look at the financial outlay that exists to bring a new innovative product to market and spend a decade and a half trying to get that approval, you've already lost, because as that timeline goes on, you're closer and closer to losing your patent,
right,
and that product going off patent and becoming generic. But also, you're at risk of losing it because somebody chooses not to like it, right? They read something, they saw a documentary, they heard something in the echo chamber, they read something from another country, and they've decided, hey, we're going to restrict it or put a ban in place. And as a company, when that happens in one spot, you go, that's tough luck.
Right.
And it happens in another spot, and you go, boy, that's start to make things difficult. When you see that pattern, you start to go, hey, how long can this go on before we can't afford to bring this product to marketplace because of the costs and the expected revenue generation from selling that? There is a break-even point.
Sure.
And so when we talk about preemption and saying if we are empowering EPA to review these products that we put in the marketplace, we are not always going to like the decisions that come out of EPA.
Right.
But if that's the body that we put in place, then we've got to honor that, whether we like it or not. And we're starting to see a trend. We're starting to get a patchwork. We lost federal preemption of pesticides back in the mid 90s, and one of the comments that came out of that decision in the courts was that there's not a patchwork of pesticide regulations out there today. We can defer to the states because there's no patchwork. Well, fast forward to 2024, and that's exactly what we have. And so if we want to be able to innovate and put the emphasis behind the research and allow companies to keep bringing new innovative products to market, solve the ever-changing agronomic problems that we have, we talk about the climate smart initiatives and many of the tools, whether those are pesticides or mechanical technologies that we're trying to bring about, we've got to make sure that we're allowing that path. And that's become a challenge. That said, extremely polarizing.
Right.
That is one of those ones that we've seen it in the House language, as Hunter said. It is not in the Senate leadership's language. Will it be in the minority Senate leadership language? Sure. But again, going back to the Senate, you're going to need folks from the Democratic side to vote for it. And there's a lot of pressure. We've seen that applied to the House members on the Democratic side, where they face pressure from leadership because sometimes it's much bigger than just the farm bill. Yeah. So issues like that are harder to really try and find a common ground on. Sometimes we look at them and say, obviously this makes sense, but
Sure.
there are arguments against it, and those are the tougher uphill battles.
And to your point, there's always that other side of the story that, it may not be this bill, it may be another bill they're working to compromise on or another subject.
Absolutely.
Well, and we've got a long way to go, too. We need to remember that just because some of ARA's priorities were included in the House committee markup, it still has to pass the House floor. The Senate has to pass one out of committee. Then it has to pass the Senate floor. As Sean said, it's got to get to 60 votes. Then they've got to go into what's called a conference, where they each body will put together a conference committee, look at what some of the differences are in the two bills, and then they start making compromises about dropping some things. And typically, some of the issues that we've supported in the past, like removing National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permit requirements, are some of the first on the chopping block. So we've got a long way to go. We want to do everything we can to reach out to ARA members like Helena, even your employees, have you reach out to your members of Congress. We've got a really neat tool called Voter Voice that we use as part of our advocacy efforts to try and get folks that live out in the states to send messages to their leadership in Congress. And just with a couple of clicks, you can have your voice heard. And as we always say, putting a constituent face on our industry is very important. It's great that ARA exists and that folks are working to protect your business. But at the end of the day, the members that you've elected to represent you in our United States Congress are really going to give a more robust ear to folks that can vote for them or not.
Sure. And I think that's a good point. That's what our democracy is all set upon, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we need to raise our voice and share our concerns with the people that we elect and put in office.
Well, we've got to stay on top of it. I mean, we talked about the timelines and the growing pessimism that this one not get passed before the elections in November. But when you look at the amount of working days, and then they'll be in for parts of July, but they will leave for the August recess. They'll be back in September, but then pretty much all of October, those folks are going to be back in their districts and their home states because election day is coming.
Yeah.
And so with all the appropriations bills that need to be passed between now and then, folks that have been around long enough look at it and say, okay, the math just doesn't add up.
Okay.
And so whether we're talking about a lame duck passage has a lot to do with how November shakes out and what pressure is able to be applied, or whether we stretch into 2025. And look, we're talking about this on June 10th.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of things can happen between now and then.
Right.
Not only domestically, but internationally, and how that impacts what's put into the Farm Bill, something that may not be priority number one today. By the end of 24 or early 25, that gets slid in. If you look at off topic, but the Russian-Ukraine conflict and how that has impacted agriculture from a grain standpoint, from a fertilizer standpoint, from just an overall trade standpoint and a spending standpoint. Who knew in January of 2020, was it two?
Yeah,
that was still going to be impacting our spending in 2024. So the unforeseen, you have to account for. We mentioned storm damage and incidents that occur. You've got to allow for some wiggle room that there may be an issue that becomes a top-line priority issue and has to go into the Farm Bill. And so staying on top of it, understanding that there's a long way to go, things can change, the majorities can change, remaining vigilant and sticking to the priorities of ARA and Helena and our employees and our customers, and fighting every day for it. Because as soon as you give in just a little bit or you remain lax, it's easy to watch something that you believe is priority number one slip away.
Right. And I can only imagine, with when you start to lay that schedule out of here we are in June recording this podcast, and throughout June and July we have a recess, and August, as you mentioned, September is going to be a quick month. Mm-hmm. And to your point, they're going to be back lobbying and trying to look for votes in October. It's going to be tight to get not just the Farm Bill done, but all the other bills that are going to be out there, which I'm sure there's many, many to be working on.
Yeah, there are. It's going to be a busy year. We, rely heavily upon our members for their input to help guide our organization. Our advocacy shop there in D.C. listens to our public policy committee, our government relations committee, and our board of directors to show us the way. We're very supportive and thankful for folks like Helena who have seats on the board and seats on different committees that help guide our ship. It's a huge honor to be with y'all and appreciate all y'all do for ARA.
Guys, I want to thank you both for joining us here today on this episode of FieldLink, bringing us up to speed what's going on in Washington as we learn a little bit more about ARA and some of the work that you're all working on as far as the 2024, hopefully, Farm Bill, and or soon after. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate it, Bill.
Thanks so much.
And welcome back to FieldLink. I'm your host, Bill Smith, and we have a special guest joining us today from Washington, D.C. with the Fertilizer Institute, Veronica Nigh. She is the senior economist for that group. Veronica, welcome to FieldLink.
Hey, thanks very much for having me on today.
Hey, it's great to have you join us from D.C. I know there's a lot of things happening in Washington related to fertilizer, and we certainly want to take some time to dive into, some of those hot topics that are, happening around Capitol Hill. But Veronica, before we go there, let's first talk a little bit about you as well as the Fertilizer Group, and tell us a little bit about the Institute.
Yeah, so the Fertilizer Institute represents anybody who sells fertilizer in the United States. So that might be a manufacturer, that might be a retailer of fertilizer, it might be an importer, it may be a wholesaler, basically the whole value chain for the fertilizer industry. And, our vision is to empower the fertilizer industry to nourish our world. So that includes, productive policy. We are in DC, and so it's hard to ignore all that DC does or doesn't do, if I'm being honest. Um, we want a strong industry that advances the economic and reputational health of the fertilizer industry by advocating for the economic, environmental, and social benefits of fertilizer and promoting continuous improvement through education, research and training, and championing platforms for industry business development opportunities and solutions. And we want a healthy environment. So we seek to advance sustainable fertilizer production, distribution, and by advocating for the 4R nutrient stewardship framework to improve farm performance and reduce nutrient loss.
Wow. The Institute's definitely touching a lot of different areas that are absolutely important to, growers out there that are listening, as well as retailers across the country. Veronica, tell us a little bit about some of the educational initiatives that TFI is working on.
Yeah, good question. So TFI, within the last year, has sort of refocused its research to make sure that the research that we're promoting, that we're funding, is really has the goal in mind of helping manufacturers, helping farmers, manufacturers to produce the products that make them have the biggest impact for growers, and for farmers to have the data to prove to those who are seeking to regulate, or on the positive side of that, pay them for potentially better stewardship, that they have the data that can prove out that the products that they're using really have that benefit. So we've really sought to make sure that research that we're working on has a tangible impact throughout the fertilizer industry. And, we've been a big advocates of the 4R program for a long time, but we really feel like that's an important way to empower everybody from all along the sort of the value chain of the fertilizer industry.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, better educating our consumers, but, our customers too, to understand how important the 4R system is, for the longevity of fertilizer. And let's face it, we need to have commercial fertilizer in order to feed, our growing population. As an economist, what are some, I guess, takeaways that our listeners can learn about the fertilizer industry? What kind of growth are you seeing as a chief economist?
Yeah, so I think by means of a little bit of background, I think it's important that I share that I've only been with TFI since December of 2023. And prior to that, I spent over 12 years with the American Farm Bureau Federation. So I certainly have the grower in mind, always as the basis for the work that we're doing at TFI. And, how would I interpret this information? And frankly, how did 2-3 years ago, when American Farm Bureau and all the other grower associations were all grappling with the significant increase in volatility and availability and frankly price in the fertilizer market. And what questions would I have liked to have asked, and what answers would have helped me to understand that market better? And that's a lot of what we're trying to do at TFI right now, is to help our industry and those our most important customers kind of understand what the variability is out there. So, I think we have a tendency, and lawmakers at the very top of this list, that fertilizer is one bucket, but it's a really interesting and complicated market, frankly. That growers are incredibly sophisticated. They know the products that they need in order to produce the best crop. And one of the things that just last week, the CEO of TFI testified on a critical minerals bill. And we're trying to get phosphate and potassium added to the critical minerals list so that it's easier for folks to invest in those industries and make sure that we have those critical nutrients available in the United States. But I say all that by means of we had to start at a pretty basic education point for those folks that it's not N, it's not P, it's not K, it's some combination of all of them. And those are just the big three. When we think about how advanced a lot of users are of fertilizer products in 2024, you've got to start thinking about not only the big three and the fact that they're not interchangeable with one another, but also all of the more minor nutrients, the environmental stewardship that growers want to undertake, and also in a lot of places are regulated to take. And so starting to understand how all those pieces fit together. Understanding each of those markets individually, I think, is really important. Thinking about how they're made, where the underlying mineral comes from, whether it's domestically sourced, whether it's imported, whether it's mined or whether it's pulled from the air in the case of nitrogen. All of those things are really a delicate picture to try to understand all of the different levers that they get pulled. So, that's a really long answer to a very short question. But as I'm looking at the market today, it's a market that is starting to look a lot more. Now, we're not there yet, so don't shoot the messenger, but it's looking a lot more like the 10-year average as far as prices are concerned. It does not, when you're sort of looking at May prices, we're not where we were back in 2019 or 2020, but we're a heck of a lot lower than we were back in those bad old days of 21 and 22.
Sure. Boy, and Veronica, you nailed it. It's a very complex industry. It's not like, hey, we're just going to, fill this barge up of fertilizer and ship it up the Mississippi and distribute it across the Midwest, or put it on a rail car and ship it, from the East Coast to the West Coast. Fertilizer and some of the minerals that you touched on, we're talking about a global market that are consistently changing and often interrupted due to global unrest. You talked about CEO testifying the other day. Tell us a little bit more about that testifying.
Yeah, so the USGS, U.S. Geological Service, maintains a list of minerals that they consider to be critical to the U.S. economy. And there's a 3-part test in order to get your mineral on that list. And unfortunately for us, phosphate and potassium aren't on there. And so we were there trying to make the case that indeed our import exposure on these products is great, and that if we weren't able to source these fertilizers, that it would have a significant impact on U.S. manufacturing and on, elements that seem pretty basic, but, you have to remind people that eating can be a luxury if you don't have enough of the inputs to actually grow a crop. So, I think when we look at, so let's talk about phosphates, those products, MAP and DAP, even the most common products, but production is concentrated in only a few countries. 56% of global production is consumed in country, and 44% of global production is exported. So that means that, those exports are concentrated in only a few countries. And if we think about what those countries are, the major exporters, 21% of phosphate exports are out of China, 27% come out of Morocco, 16% out of Russia, Saudi Arabia is another 15% of exports. And, when you call that list of countries to mind, stability isn't the first word that really comes to mind, right?
Right.
And then when we look at potash, that's a mined product that's, those reserves are way down deep. And that's one of those where the production is even more concentrated. And about 75% of global production is exported. So, and we think about who those countries are on an exporter basis. Canada's 46% of potash exports, but Russia's 17%, Belarus is another 10%, Israel's 9%. So again, you start thinking about all of the disruptions that have occurred in a lot of those countries over the last several years. And not to be overly pessimistic, but a lot of volatility still in those countries, those regions of the world. And so when we think about how globally dependent we are on trade in those products, it's pretty important to us that we start thinking about not just today, but into the future. Do we want to build up more resiliency in the United States, i.e., do we want to be able to produce more of these products domestically? And, for us, it's a pretty easy answer to yes. And by virtue of getting on these lists, it makes it a lot easier for companies to recognize their commitment to stability of those minerals. And so that makes it an easier decision to invest in that exploration. So, we typically, when you think about how long it takes to invest in additional mine production, we're in the range of like 3 to 5 years. And if you want to think about the cost, you add $1 billion to those numbers, $3 to $5 billion to open a new site. Those are big numbers, even by DC standards. And so hoping to get those products again on that critical minerals list to show the commitment of the U.S. to making sure that we have those resources available into the future.
Well, that's a really interesting work that you certainly are working on. And, the old saying goes, food security is global security in some cases. And it sounds like the TFI is certainly taking a position there to really ensure our long-term security as a nation and really as a food source for around the world.
Yeah, that's, you nailed it. That's certainly, it's hard to feel secure. And this is going back a little too far in my education, but that hierarchy of needs, being able to feed yourself is, as I recall, pretty core to feeling secure.
Yeah, definitely. Food security is very important. Definitely high on the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and it sounds like you're very aligned with that. Veronica, what are some other issues that you and your team are I guess, working around the DC area right now?
Yeah. So again, coming from Farm Bureau, pretty familiar with that feeling of burden that comes from being a well-regulated industry. And so if I thought I was going to get a reprieve from that by going to the fertilizer industry, I was sadly mistaken. I didn't, but it would have been a nice surprise, But as we're looking at the environmental, particularly EPA actions over the last 6-12 months and that distance into the future, there's a couple of things that really stand out as issues that EPA is working on that could have significant impacts on our customers and therefore also our businesses. And one, that's the IRIS assessment on nitrates and nitrites, which could really, our concern is that the way EPA is working on this IRIS assessment, it feels like we could have some pretty strong restrictions from EPA on the ability to use nitrogen fertilizers, which, I don't have to tell this listener group that about 50%, a somewhat recent study in the last 10 years or so showed that about 50% of global production would go away if we didn't have commercial fertilizers. So, and nitrogen's, of course, a big part of that. So if we start looking at EPA potentially limiting the ability for farmers to be able to use nitrogen fertilizers, that'd be, a huge deal for all of us. And then on the other element, we just ended up submitting within the last couple of weeks some comments related to the use of formaldehyde, which, this is one of those things you have to get kind of deep in the chemistry to appreciate. And I'm certainly being educated every day on this, but formaldehyde is a product that is used in the formulation of a lot of our what we call enhanced efficiency fertilizers. I don't know if that's just a TFI speak or if that's if I would see that on signage in your locations as well. I'll have to look the next time I'm home because there's a you have a location just about 15 miles from where I grew up. So I'll pop in and see. But formaldehyde is used a lot in those enhanced efficiency fertilizers to help in the slow release products. And the way EPA is looking at that risk assessment, it would be really challenging to be able to continue to use formaldehyde in those products. So we submitted comments. We think EPA maybe didn't have the best information available as far as how fertilizers are actually handled, how they're actually applied, and hoping that with some better information, they can make a better decision and maybe not find quite as restrictive of a use for some of those products. And I said it's the slow release products, but it's also urea at large. It's not just so when we look at nitrogen use in the United States, about 25% of all nitrogen in the U.S. is applied through urea. Globally, it's closer to 50%. But can you imagine how upsetting that would be to the market if we no longer were able to use urea, and how disruptive that would be? So, I guess at large, a lot of environmental questions that we're working on to make sure that we can preserve the use of the products that we're all dependent on today.
Wow. You bring up a great point with, some of the regulatory, I guess, I don't know, maybe trying to share some education, some maybe common sense, and really just the science, really, behind, how some of these products are developed and how they work. And, balancing that, of course, with the greater good. Are we going to restrict our, food by 50%? What's the value risk assessment there? So I applaud you for taking the time to educate us on this podcast, but also to educate the industry, legislation, and so forth amongst our country, really, to better understand how fertilizer impacts the overall market. Veronica, what are some other things that TFI is working on that I guess our listeners and our growers across the nation need to be aware of?
Well, Bill, I've been in DC for 15 years now, and I'm still annoyingly positive. And that's people have tried to fix that, but I can't be fixed. And so there are some more positive things on the horizon that TFI is working on. Things like the Certified Biostimulant Program, which is something that TFI launched to try to, it's a voluntary evidence-based program that awards companies a label indicating that their product meets industry-recognized standards for efficacy, safety, and composition. The program is based on the United States Biostimulant Industry Guidelines, which provides criteria for the proper documentation of evidence to support efficacy claims. We know that area is both exciting and, frankly, a little wild. So that program launched June 26th of last year. We're trying to just bring a little more rigor and to put some rails around those products for folks who think that would be a helpful thing for their product. Maybe they're, and maybe provide just a little bit more data in that space. Something else that we're working on, Inflation Reduction Act. You'll recall that in the last couple of years, there were some clean energy tax rulemakings that have certainly some impact on growers and also on the fertilizer industry as we're thinking about things like trying to transition to lower carbon ammonia production. So some really exciting things. I won't go into the details of those today, but certainly a lot of that work. And then one thing that I'll certainly mention that being new to the industry, not new to ag, but new to fertilizer. I'm painfully aware of some of the lack of data that's out there on the fertilizer industry. And, as I've combed through the information that's available, there used to be a lot more. USDA used to do a lot more reporting at the state level, on the product level, on the uptake of things like the use of enhanced efficiency fertilizers, things like all of those variable rate technologies that folks are using. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but there used to be a lot more information, and we're trying to get some provisions into the Farm Bill to add an economist that focuses on fertilizer at USDA, which I know sounds like a novel concept, but they haven't had one in 30 years.
Wow.
And to start looking at adding back some of that data that we know our customers would really like to have, and that frankly the industry would benefit from as well.
Wow. And to your point, even growers would gain a lot of insight from that based on the results, the data that can help, the industry make better decisions for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Veronica, I want to thank you for joining us here from the Fertilizer Institute in Washington, D.C., Senior Economist Veronica Nigh. Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink.
Thanks very much for having me on today, Bill. I really appreciate it.
This is Jessie Lamp filling in for Bill on the FieldLink podcast. Today's episode will make your mouth water as we dive deep into summertime fruits and veggies. Joining us are Helena representatives Greg Norris and Kevin Rodak in the Northeast to give growers the inside scoop on Trico Pro and how to keep pesky deer away from your crops. So sit back and grab your grocery list as we give you inspiration for your next shopping trip. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So to kind of just kick things off and with the direction we're going to go, tell us a little bit about your background, within the produce field and where you got started, kind of your past, present, and future. Greg, go ahead and start us off.
Yeah, so I kind of grew up a little bit away from the fresh market, fruit and vegetable market. I actually grew up on a dairy farm in Western Massachusetts, so kind of got a little bit of a later start to it, but I actually started with Helena when I was in college through our internship program. So after my sophomore year of college, I interned with our Genoa, New York location, and they're actually mostly grain crops and dairy farms out there, but they have one pretty big vegetable farm that they work with. So that was really my first introduction with any kind of vegetable production. And then after that, I continued on interning. Interned at our Hatfield, Massachusetts location that's, as Kevin will talk about, is filled with fruit and vegetable crops that we work with. And then I started on there full time, worked about a year there, working with a bunch of different fruit and vegetable growers. And then last August, I moved into the Helena Products Manager role, covering all of the Northeast states. So it's been something that throughout my whole Helena experience, I've really gotten a lot of opportunity to work with any kind of vegetable crop and fruit crop that we grow here in the Northeast.
Kevin, anything else you'd like to add? Kind of share your story?
So yeah, when I was about 9 or 10 years old, I went to work on a family vegetable farm down the street from my house in Hadley, Massachusetts. Worked there for about 7 years and ended up going to college for agricultural business. And also did an internship. Did that in 2009 at Helena. And I've been here since. I had a few different roles before. I was a warehouse manager for 7 years. And I've been in the sales rep position since about 2017 to now. So I've been in the valley here where it's heavy vegetables, little less dairy, but some fruit. So I kind of grew up around that.
Absolutely. And Kevin, I was informed that you're kind of a potato enthusiast. Can you share a little bit more about that and your knowledge?
Yeah, so my best friend I grew up with is from the largest potato farm in the state. So, yeah, I've known potatoes probably since I was 6 or 7 that I can remember.
Very neat. As a Midwest, Nebraska girl, I know when I think about potatoes, I think of Idaho. So can you kind of elaborate more what the potato industry looks like in Northeast United States?
Yeah, so in our area is a big fresh pack market, which means it's right to the grocery store as a full potato. We get up into Maine, which is a very, very large market, a little better than Idaho even too. And they actually raise 50,000 plus acres up there, fresh packed and processed potatoes. So they're making French fries, they're making every little potato process you can think of, crinkle fries. So we deal with it all.
Very neat. And Greg, I know you mentioned your internship experience and how that really got you introduced to Helena. Working as a product manager, what current issues are you seeing within the growers and the market? Is it drought, flooding, diseases? What are some current hot topics?
We've definitely had a little bit of everything for conditions so far this spring. We're coming off a year last year that ended pretty rough for growers in this area, where basically from July on, we just got rainstorm after rainstorm and dealt with a lot, not only here in the Pioneer Valley in Western Massachusetts, but even across New York and some of the other Northeast states where there's river floodings and fields flooding out. So that really dramatically impacts the quality of the crops that we're dealing with. So going in this year, it's really important for a lot of these farms to be able to hopefully rebound off of what was a disappointing end to the season last year. So far, we've had pretty solid conditions in part of the geography that I cover, especially out in Western New York. They got a little more rain to start the season. So whether it came to planting or even just getting out in the field and putting fertilizer out or anything that comes in that spring field preparation, it was definitely a little delayed. But now it looks like we're finally getting into a stretch where we'll have a little bit warmer weather with less rainfall throughout. So hopefully that gives everyone the opportunity to really get out now as we begin some of our fungicide sprays and start working in some foliar nutritionals and bioscience products to really get this crop dialed in to make sure that we can get the biggest return this year after a somewhat disappointing end to the season last year.
Absolutely. Kevin, do you have anything to share?
No, I'm just looking forward. I mean, last year when July hit, we lost 25% of the crops in the first 3 weeks that were under the Connecticut River. So that really did some damage to these farms. And then it just didn't stop raining. So we're looking to just get the best crop, the highest yields, everything that we can this year to bump up their sales.
Absolutely. So kind of looking into the region, Northeast region, you're growing potatoes, very vegetated area of the United States compared to Idaho, where I grew up. But something that not a lot of people think about is the deer population and wildlife and the impact that has on crop production. So what are you doing to fight that challenge or combat that in the potato production industry?
So, we use a new product on the market called Trico Pro. It's made of a sheep fat, fresh from, Greg, can you remind me?
Austria, I believe.
Yep. So we've got that product over here now, and we have seen wonders with it. It's any crop, potatoes, cucurbits. Early on in the season, we did work with strawberries, apple crops. The deer like to nibble on the trees all winter. We put that product out in November, which is about when we start getting frosts up here and some snowstorms. Mm-hmm. And these farmers are seeing no damage all the way into March, April of the following year.
Yeah, absolutely. So Trico Pro, a Helena Products group, just kind of looking statistic-wise, it's very successful among our vegetable categories and specialty crops. But how drastic is this product? Is it essential in this industry? Why is this something that farmers need to look into and is essential for their operation?
I think it's a product that is becoming more and more apparent that deer damage is an issue in our industry since we've had this product and can kind of see the difference in it. I know Kevin got a great picture last year where he had a grower just leave a check strip of it on his cucurbit crop. And the deer basically completely mowed down where it wasn't sprayed with the Trico Pro and the rest of the crop was untouched. So I think it's something that for the longest time, any deer repellents that have been on the market just haven't had any level of success whatsoever. So ever since we can finally nail that down, we're seeing a lot better results out of it.
Okay, Kevin, so diving into Trico Pro just a little bit more, how in the row crop industry, how easy is this to apply? How often? Kind of talk about the application process.
Yeah, so we do it probably 3 or 4 different ways depending on the crop. Some of the smaller fields, our area, we have farmers that are anywhere from 1 acre fields to 200 acre fields. So it makes it a little little different how it's applied. We have some guys that will put it in backpack sprayers, a gallon of Trico Pro with 2 gallons of water. And that's got, our 3 to 4 month control, which is awesome because we're putting it on, somewhat early in the crop stage, and the crop's harvested by the time the deer want to go back in that field. Another one's like apples, like I explained. I mean, we're putting it on in the winter time and getting complete control through the winter to keep the deer from hitting on the buds of the tree. Pumpkins and squash, which is a big one because a lot of deer like to go and take 1 or 2 bites out of every pumpkin in the field, and then it ruins that pumpkin. So we'll put out a rate of 2 quarts right with our fungicide and get us, a nice 2 to 3 month window without deer coming back into the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share the current results that you're seeing this year by using Trico Pro compared to in the past?
Yeah, so this year, I mean, one of our early crops here is strawberries, and right when the strawberries come out of their dormancy from the winter, which is usually about April up here, we're applying that Trico Pro as a broadcast across the field, because these deer are just going to look for something, the first green that pops up in the area they want to nibble on. So that's going to help right first thing in the spring to stop them from entering the field. Then we'll move on to some other crops that we put plastic mulch down, such as sweet corn, peppers, tomatoes, and we'll spray that Trico Pro right across the plastic, and it'll keep them from walking across the field. A lot of that plastic mulch is there to stop any weeds from coming up. So anytime you make a hole in that plastic, you're going to get weeds in the field. So it kind of stops them from walking over that. We always try to hit the 4th of July corn market up here, and they put it under a plastic mulch. And the same thing, imagine, a deer walking across a greenhouse. Well, you're going to lose that heat in the greenhouse that we want for that corn to ripen faster.
Keeping on the path of Trico Pro, when do you apply it during your planting season?
Yeah, so we usually wait. So, if pumpkins or squash or anything's coming up, early on, deer usually aren't a problem. Once we get flowering, I've been past fields where deer are just standing there plucking the nice yellow flowers off of these crops. So that's when we'll start applying it. And it usually will last, 3 to 4 months. And by that time, we're already out in the field harvesting. We also want to make sure we're getting the crop when it's decent size, because we want to cover as much foliage as possible. And we found out that the higher dilution rate, so, the 2 quart would get us a few months. If we want a gallon, that extended the control of the Trico Pro.
So yeah, understanding that we know the effectiveness of Trico Pro, Greg, can you elaborate more on the safetiness and health reasons and safetiness behind Trico Pro?
Yeah, it's been something that has been super easy for us to handle and apply. We've had a lot of success. There's really no concerns about it, just going out with a backpack sprayer, and there's a relatively low PHI on it. So with any fruit or vegetable crops that are being used for human consumption, there's that 14-day PHI on there. So it's something where we can get pretty late in the season when we're applying it to make sure we're really protecting that crop before it's harvested. And there's a low reentry interval as well. So that makes it pretty easy to apply and not have to worry about keeping workers out of the field any longer.
Absolutely. And moving on to the consumer route, keeping on the topic of summertime vegetables, what recommendations can you give to shoppers at the grocery store when looking for vegetables? Any tips when shopping for produce?
I personally like when consumers go, direct to the farm or small mom and pop grocery stores. We do move a lot wholesale as well. And the good thing about our grocery stores is that they promote local produce. So you'll walk into like a Big Y or a Stop and Shop, which are pretty big ones for us around here. And they'll have signs with farmers' pictures and saying, these peppers were picked from Joe Smo from Hadley. So it just lets you know that they're local and locally grown. And then up and down the streets here, especially along the river, there's a farm stand on every corner. So you know that you're getting the freshest produce, the local produce. And these guys really take their time to get the best crop. So you're getting the best produce at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think to go off of what Kevin said too, we definitely live in a pretty unique area where there's so much on-farm retail where everyone has a farm stand and is selling stuff right off of the farm. We're really lucky too, where even whether you go to the grocery store or even just a restaurant in the area, so many local products are out there for consumers to get. And it's something I know all of the consumers around here definitely love having agriculture in the area and love having this fresh produce available. So the best way to be able to keep that going and keep supporting these farms is to buy that produce that you see versus some of the alternatives that might be from a little farther away or even from another country. So anything you can do to help support these farms by buying their products at a grocery store on the farm stand is going to really help to preserve local agriculture in our community too.
Very good. Anything else we're missing or want to add?
Yeah, I think you're missing one of the most important things about our area.
Okay.
Is the town I grew up in and I live in now, Hadley, Massachusetts, is actually known as the asparagus capital of the world. So we actually have, not my farm first, my parents have a small family farm where they do strawberries and asparagus, but other farms that I worked on as a kid too, they've actually shipped asparagus to Queen Elizabeth II's annual Spring Fest, which is a pretty fun fact. So yeah, that's our first crop that we're harvesting up here in New England. Usually starts about the first week in May, and it's actually just rounding out now. Guys are going to be finishing up picking by the end of the week here. So that's probably our top crop that's well known in the area. You go to any restaurant or pub and they're serving asparagus fries, or there's a Hadley pizza which has asparagus on it. I mean, farm stands can't keep it on there long enough. By 1-2 o'clock, you drive around town and every farm stand's empty.
Wow. Yep. Hadley, Massachusetts is the asparagus capital of the world. Just celebrated their 10th annual festival on June 1st. So, Kevin, elaborate more. Talk about the asparagus market. How has it grown? The climate, weather. How imperative is this market?
Well, it's big. I mean, it's the first dollar that the farmer's getting. A lot of it is cash sales, which they like. You know, they get some money in their pocket early to help pay for some inputs. In the 1970s, actually, we had a fusarium breakout, and that kind of wiped out a large amount of the asparagus in the area. And now with some new varieties and some new disease-resistant strains, it's pumping. There's farmers putting new asparagus in every year. Every acre gets about 2,000 pounds of asparagus off it in a year, which is 2,000 bunches if you see them in the store. So it's just grown. The sandy loam soil along the Connecticut River is prime growing for asparagus. And it seems like you never know in the spring. I mean, we get flooding early from the rivers. Sometimes we get snow in April and it slows things down, but it always seems like there's a good 5 to 6 week season. And the cool part is actually, I got to tell a little story here. I used to pick asparagus when I was in 10th, 11th grade. And the cool part was they let us go to school late without getting a tardy or an absence for that day. So as long as we were there by 9:30, 10 o'clock, and they knew we were picking asparagus, they just shook our hand and said, "Enjoy your day. Thank you."
Well, that's great. I know asparagus goes great with Nebraska beef, especially grown in the state. But so any other topics or things that we touched on or dive deeper with Trico Pro or anything like that? If not, we'll wrap it up with a fun question.
I just want to say we also have a nice peach crop up in this area. Everybody thinks Georgia peaches, but New England has some of the sweetest peaches around as well. And last year we lost a lot of them actually to a frost in February. And this year they're looking full, and it's going to be a nice year for them as well.
Very good. Greg, anything else, or we'll wrap it up?
I think we're good to wrap it up.
Perfect. Okay. Been dying to know. It's imperative and important for this podcast episode. If you could be any style of potato, we're talking mashed potato, baked potato, French fries, heck, go waffle fries, which one would you be and why?
I'm going to go with, my favorite is a crinkle potato. There's a farm up in Maine that processes them unbelievable. And they send them down to us. And every Sunday, we actually have a patio Sunday, we call it, where we'll watch football and have 50, 60 people watching football and having potatoes. And actually, they cut hand cut fries every Sunday. We probably go through a 50-pound bag. So I have to say, hand cut fries are my favorite. Little bit of vinegar, ketchup, and actually, if you haven't tried it, you have to do it with blue cheese with a little hot sauce in it as well. Try dipping the fries in that. Whew.
I'm gonna have to take a gander at that. That's pretty wild. Greg, what are you thinking?
I'm going to have to go the same with hand-cut French fries, too. I think we're lucky in our area with a lot of potato crop growing around here that we have some access to some really good French fries, whether it's at a restaurant or even just in the grocery store, too.
Okay.
But
Are we talking straight or crinkle? Because there's a big difference.
I definitely tend to lean more towards the straight cut fries, but I definitely love to hit up a good Irish pub or even just anywhere up in Aroostook County, Maine that does some good French fries from some of the potato farms in the area, and definitely have a strong preference for some garlic Parmesan fries where I can find them too.
Absolutely. I think since my time here in the good old state of Tennessee, I've got to experience the pleasure of a well-cooked sweet potato fry, and that has to be my top tier pick. This is Jessie Lamp filling in for Bill on the FieldLink podcast.
And welcome back to FieldLink. Now joining us from Nashville is Jody Lawrence. Jody, welcome to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill. It's good to be back as we have now turned the calendar into June with more going on. Cropping almost completely planted, good initial ratings, just a lot going on for what's about to be a very warm June, it looks like.
Yeah, June's definitely here. Temps are starting to increase in some parts of the country for sure. We've had rain. We've, things are starting to dry out in some areas. Planting's starting to wrap up. Jody, we had a crop rating report just recently come out. What's the USDA talking about there?
On Monday's report, it was the second week for corn, and corn came in at 74% good to excellent. And beans' initial report was at 72% good to excellent. And those are the best initial crop ratings since 2018. And you can kind of see largely based on the fact that everybody has gotten a lot of water, a lot of rain, and it turned off just in time to get the crop planted. Because as we sit here, heading into when the crop should be winding up, you're really in a spot that you're talking about, less than 10 or less than 7% of the corn crop, and by now less than 10% of the bean crop. So there may be some prevent plant, there may be some wet holes that don't get replanted, but for everybody I've talked to, it's more regional or kind of over a few counties in a state rather than a state or region-wide problem. So the crop should get in. For the bulls, you would love to see some acres not get planted unless they're on your farm, but we have passed all the prevent plant dates, so it's really just kind of a coin flip now if the corn acres go into beans or they don't get planted at all.
Yeah, you talk about the crop rating report, best since 2018. Gosh, Jody, it just seems like yesterday we were on the podcast talking about how tough things are and how crazy things are. But Jody, break this down a little bit. How are these ratings, how are they developed? Where does that information come from?
Well, I am not the most impartial person to talk about this because I think these ratings are just complete BS, to be perfectly honest about it. Because not that the people that are doing them are, have ulterior motives, but most of them are just, county agents or FSA people, whoever, just driving around their county and their area going, hey, looks pretty good. Looks like and they have some sort of rating formula. And normally you would accompany 68 to 70% as a trend line yield. And But what we found last year and what we have found in previous years is that last year's, if you tried to use kind of a metric or a ratio of what a 62% good to excellent August 15th corn crop rating looked like, then the yield would not have been a record 177.3. It would have been historically a 172, 173, maybe a 174. So these really are just honest people making their best estimate. But when you look at what happened last year, nobody predicted the crop correctly. Even the farmers and the agronomists and everybody who I have complete respect for, nobody saw last year coming as big and as good of a crop it was through the stress. So I'm taking all this year with a much bigger grain of salt, but there's no doubt about it. A huge majority of Corn Belt's off to a great start.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. This is the data. There's a data. The ratings are the ratings. At the end of the day, we've got far more moisture in some of those drought-stricken areas that, we've had the last several years. Overall, things look pretty darn good, and that crop's coming along. Now, granted, it might be just emerging in some markets, and then a mile or two down the road, it could be knee high. But nonetheless, we've got a crop in the ground, and it's coming along. Hey, Jody, let's transition a little bit. Boy, there's a lot of news around the energy markets. We've got a lot of news in the Middle East that's really starting to impact, what's going on in the energy and oil market.
Well, the initial ceasefire agreement, and appears there was one agreed to and announced earlier today. I've not seen all the details on that, and the energy markets are not reacting like they did last time. Whenever this was, a week, 10 days ago, when the initial one was kind of out there, crude oil dropped $7 a barrel, and diesel dropped 15 cents a gallon. Since then, when we had the weekend raid for the hostages and then the airstrikes in the civilian area where they thought Hamas was kind of hiding behind the Citizens Shield, everything went right back up to where we were before the ceasefire. You've had some talks of additional cuts coming out of OPEC. You've had some cuts, and Russia now being an OPEC plus, talk coming out of Russia that they were going to end their cuts. So it's really murky water in the energy markets right now. But I continue to advise, because we do know heading into the hurricane season that started June 1st with record warm Gulf waters, and just how crazy the weather has been and extra warm for the past year to 18 months, one major hurricane could really disrupt this market. So keep topping off your tanks on these dips, and we certainly should get one if this ceasefire does hold, which would be wonderful for everybody.
Yeah, you got to just think that OPEC's going to, at some point, and they have enter this conversation and really try to control the flow of oil and just really the overall supply.
Yeah, that they prefer to see it above 80, and we're trading kind of in this $74, $77 range. And from a producer standpoint, we would love to see higher energy prices, because you have more margin for ethanol and biodiesel,
right?
And that creates more demand from the people crushing the corn and refining the biodiesel and the beans. So it's always kind of a double-edged sword. You look at it and say, gosh, I hate paying $4 a gallon for diesel, but then you look at it, if it's added 30, 40 cents to the value of your beans and that to your corn, then you go, oh, okay, I just made up for that pretty easily.
You can make up for that pretty quickly. Jody, let's transfer to the rest of the global news that's poking around here. We've got a little news south of the border in Mexico, along with, of course, over across the Atlantic in Russia. What's going on over there?
Well, Mexico really is the highlight problem, because they have become, with China's, move towards more South American origin beans and corn. Mexico is now our number one corn buyer, and also a lot of other products, beef and pork, are on that list as well. But Mexico is really in the middle of what you could most easily equate to our 2012 drought. It's been viciously warm their entire spring and early summer, and they've really got some production problems, and you can see that as that heat dome begins to work its way into the U.S. forecast. And you look at some of these temperatures from Las Vegas to Houston, heat index is already at this time of year in the 115 range. That does make you worry that it's coming this way. But Mexico's problem, unfortunately, for higher prices, somebody has to have a problem for prices to go higher for us to take advantage of it. And you hate it for anybody, but that's just the nature of the beast. The other one is Russia. Their Black Sea wheat and corn regions for both Ukraine and Russia have had a really, really dry spring. Their winter wheat crop got more information out today that it's probably going to be cut even further because the late frost damage more so than the drought, or a combination of the two, really. So their harvest is going to be started, and that's something to look at. On the other hand, U.S. winter wheat harvest has started, and we're expecting record yields. Everybody I'm hearing that's been in the field are really, really happy. The spring rains helped, and now that it's drying out and warming up, it may put a little stress on the corn crop, but it helps everybody who's harvesting wheat. So there's always a plus and minus for any weather situation. Northern China, where they grow a majority of their corn, is also beginning to get hotter and drier. I wouldn't push the button on a red alert just yet, but you're certainly there. Brazil, the new president Lulu added a tax increase on all ag exports in particular. And so farmers are just holding them as both an inflation hedge and the fact that they're now getting what amounts to about somewhere between 10 and 15% less, even though the price of beans has not moved. And the corn stunt disease that had really plagued Argentina's safrina crop, it looks like in a lot of places, several different very productive regions, that their normal corn yield of 120 to 130 is going to be cut to 50 to 60 bushels an acre. So you've got plenty of problems, but when you're sitting on June 11th and the U.S. weather and crop look good, it's easy for the market to kind of look out their back door and look locally rather than globally.
Yeah. Wow. Certainly a lot of stuff happening around the globe, not just domestically. Tons of stuff. Jody, we got a couple of reports coming up here in the next few weeks with WASDE, Planet Acreage report. Anything poking out there that has you a little bit concerned?
The June WASDE, the biggest thing that I'm concerned there is that our bean sales pace has not been good, that they are going to lower the bean export total, which goes straight to the bottom line, so ending stocks go up. But our corn and wheat pace, our corn pace is about 25% ahead of last year, and Mexico a huge part of that. And the wheat pace is increasing because of the problems in Russia and some other areas that had some wheat issues. So we're hopeful that whatever bad news may be told to us about beans is more than offset by the corn and wheat increases in demand. And they also are going to update Argentina and Brazil's yields on Wednesday. And then CONAB comes out Thursday to tell us what they think about Brazil. And the dance here continues to be the USDA on Brazil's bean crop is, 8 million metric tons, let's just call it 300 million bushels above almost every private analyst and the government analyst in Brazil. And at some point that has to be, addressed. And we still are looking at Brazil's cash market. The tax increase may be causing this, to be harder to read, but Brazil's basis has been steadily improving over the last 6 weeks. And if you have a record harvest, basis doesn't go up at the end of a record harvest. So a lot of things, a lot of cross currents always. The bigger one, where I'm expecting to see the real fireworks, is going to be the Planet Acreage report at the end of the month on June 29th. And that comes back to what we were just talking about on how the weather was, what happens with the prevent plant decisions over the next 5 to 10 days. And if you got 1 million acres cut out of corn and 1 million acres cut out of beans, and the USDA tells us that, that would be a really, really good base to start any sort of weather rally. I'm not trying to kill off the U.S. crop by any account, but certainly everybody's going to be much happier with price if we have a 178 yield rather than a 181 yield.
Right. Yeah, those reports are going to be pretty critical coming forward here pretty shortly here in the next few weeks, and definitely going to impact our grain markets across the country. Jody, we're looking forward to having you live here in Memphis at the Innovation Expo on July 18th here in Memphis at the Helena Products Group. And Jody's going to be joined. If you're interested in coming in, contact your Helena representative. Jody's going to be live with us here, joined by Chip Flory from AgriTalk and Sean Haney from Real Ag Radio out of Canada. Jody, you're going to be part of a global panel about agri-marketing here at the Innovation Expo here in Memphis.
I'm looking forward to learning from a couple people who are much more talented and smarter than I am. So I'm going to listen and nod my head and act like I agree so that I keep the chance of me putting my foot in my mouth to the bare minimum.
Well, it's a great opportunity for growers from across the country to come join us here in Memphis, learn about a lot of different products and technologies and innovations that you can certainly impact your sustainability approach to agriculture, as well as learn a little bit about some grain marketing and some tactics that might impact you as you continue to plant 24 and beyond. So, Jody, I want to thank you for joining us here on this episode of FieldLink, and we certainly look forward to seeing you here in Memphis on July 18th.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink. Whether you're raising vegetables, tree crops, or row crops, ask your Helena representative how Trico Pro can protect your crop from deer damage this year.